Hey there, I'm Torisor, and welcome back to Ranking TMNT Characters. Today we're going to be covering the first of the Ninja Turtles, and you all voted for me to cover Donatello. As always, we are only going to be covering the 10 on-screen iterations of Donatello, but with that, let's get into the ranking. In last place is Donatello from the 2007 animated film TMNT. As I mentioned for Casey and April, most of the characters in TMNT 2007 don't get a lot of focus on an individual level outside of Leo and Raph. Because of this, they don't get enough focus to stand out as a particularly memorable version of the character. However, the small moments that do highlight Donnie's personality in this film are quite enjoyable. The IT scene, for example, showcases the sass and impatience that comes with dealing with incompetent people. I'm sure those of you who have worked customer service jobs for a while understand that frustration. I think there's a solid foundation for Donatello in this universe in this scene, and elements of that personality show in minor ways throughout the film. However, I don't think we see enough of Donatello in this iteration to justify ranking him above any of the other Donatellos, not only based on his personality on an individual level, but the relationships he has with the other characters. We get a little bit of insight into his dynamics with the other characters, but nowhere near any of the other iterations. In ninth place is Donatello from Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation, and I unironically believe that this show has a lot of really solid characters, Donatello included. Due to the nature of the show being a bit goofier and more lighthearted, we don't have those super heartfelt, emotional, and impactful character story beats. However, I still find Donnie to be really enjoyable in this series. For one, he's kind of a goofball, not to the extent of Michelangelo, but he loves making silly little jokes to himself and poking fun at his brothers.
We're not brothers.
Sorry, his friends and roommates that are like brothers. Though Donatello has fun interactions with all of the turtles, I love how they highlighted the contrast between him and Venus. Venus is incredibly spiritual and uses magic, which is very antithetical to Donnie's analytical and scientific mind. This conflict manifests itself deliberately and through general banter between Donnie and Venus. This is something I want to explore in TMNT Genesis because it's a really cool character dynamic, and in a more serious story, it could be very compelling for both Donatello and Venus's character development. Next Mutation Donatello can be a bit of a little shit sometimes, but I personally find it kind of endearing. Maybe it's just because I relate to that aspect of his personality. Being a little shit is a lot of fun. At number 8, I have Donatello from the 1990 live-action films. The interactions between Donnie and Mikey are some of my favorites from these movies. They have such fun banter with one another. When it comes to Donatello on his own, I think he especially shines in Secret of the Ooze, where he not only radiates theater kid energy, but we see him having a bit of an existential crisis about the random nature of his and his family's mutation. Although I do really enjoy 1990 Donatello, he isn't as interesting to me as most of the other versions of the character. I think my general stance on all of the 1990 turtles is that they work really well as an ensemble. Raphael is definitely the main turtle of the first film and arguably the trilogy as a whole, but otherwise the turtles don't stand out to me on an individual level. I think they're each very solid characters and have a few standout moments, but when compared to most of the other iterations, there isn't as much of that individual exploration. That said, I do really like 1990 Donnie, and I think he is a very solid representation of who Donatello is in this franchise. In 7th place is Donatello from the 2010s live-action films. I think they did a great job of capturing some of the nuances of Donnie's character in these films, especially in the subtle ways that he's a bit dorky, with his snort laugh in the first movie and the silly little turn he does in Out of the Shadows when being introduced to Casey Jones. I especially love the chemistry he has with his brothers and some of the small moments and interactions between them.
Hey Raph, do that thing!
Oh, no, I don't want to do it. It hurts.
Do it. Won't stop until you do it.
I also think his design is fun. Of the time Donatello's been given glasses, I think these work with his design the best. Like with the previous Donatellos, Bayverse Donnie doesn't have that extra oomph that makes him stand out compared to the other Donatellos, but he's still really fun. In 6th place, I have Donatello from the 2012 animated series. 2012 Donnie is really the first Donatello that tries something a bit more out of the box with his characterization, and that is mixing in a bit of a temper. Like, obviously Raphael is more characterized as a hothead, but Donnie loses his temper just as much, if not more, over little things, especially when Michelangelo does or says some dumb shit. I love this unique approach to Donnie, especially because it doesn't take away from the ways the show has adhered to his typical characterization of being the kind of dorky smart one, and exaggerates the sass we've already seen in many other versions of the character. Another aspect of Donatello's characterization in 2012 I really enjoy is his desperation to be helpful. Although the way he's written in regards to April is kind of exhausting, particularly in the first couple seasons. It's overshadowed by the ways in which he's a fantastic version of Donatello and is a way we see Donnie's need to be useful emphasized, particularly when it comes to rescuing and demutating April's dad. Surprising absolutely no one, I am once again going to plug the problem with Apritello. This is the last ranking video, I'll bring it up, but it is a more in-depth analysis of Donnie and April's relationship and how the writing was detrimental to both of their characters. In 5th place is Donatello from Mutant Mayhem and Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. As with the other 3 turtles, I wasn't super impressed with Donnie's characterization in the film. The turtles were absolutely delightful as a group, but because they were all together for the duration of the movie, it was difficult to get a sense of them individually outside of their archetypes. Even then, I felt like Donnie didn't have much tying him to his typical role as the smart sciencey one outside of the post-credits scene in which he's hanging out with all of the computer science nerds. I did really enjoy having a new interpretation of his dorkiness with his interests in K-pop and anime as well as his sassy personality, but we didn't get much that had him read as Donatello. However, Tales of the TMNT worked absolute wonders for these turtles, and Donnie definitely benefited the most. Right off the bat, Donnie is highlighted as having computer and robotics knowledge, reprogramming Bishop's mechazoids, and creating Metalhead in the process. In the Pearl arc, Donnie also expresses his difficulty with handling feelings and being the only quote-unquote right-brained of his brothers. As someone who firmly headcanons every version of Donatello as autistic, to me this reads as coding for Donnie's autism, especially in the ways in which he references Akira and Star Wars to help Wingnut through her panic. I still think Mutant Mayhem Donnie has a lot of potential and room to grow into an even better version of Donatello, but the characterization we have now is awesome and I can't wait to see more of him. At number 4, I have Donatello from Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This movie is easily my favorite of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles films, and a huge reason why is how great the characters are. They did such a phenomenal job with the Turtles' characterizations and interactions, and Donatello is an amazing example. I adore how well they balanced various aspects of his personality, from his sass,
You sure this cave leads anywhere?
Glad you asked. I am sure, actually.
to his dorkiness,
Bow staffs are cool.
They are.
to him being the smart science guy we all know and love. Not only does he have delightful interactions with his brothers, but I especially adore his chemistry with Batgirl. They match each other's energy so well and are absolutely adorable together. I love them so much. And once again, tying in my headcanon of Donatello being autistic, there are a couple of moments where Donatello gives a suggestion that is not wanted and he hides in his shell in embarrassment. Batman vs. Donnie is such an incredible version of Donatello. If you have not seen this movie, definitely go check it out because it is so good. Moving into my top 3, in 3rd place I have Donatello from the 2003 animated series. Donnie in the 2003 series is probably my favorite in the way that he repurposes the stuff he finds into things that are more useful for the turtles, especially when it comes to vehicles. We first see this with the battle shell being created out of the van from the first episode, and it is a trend that continues throughout the series. I also adore all of the relationships he has with each of the characters he interacts with. There are such fun interactions with his brothers, and I especially love his relationship with Michelangelo. April is such a great friend to Don in this iteration, especially due to her scientific background, allowing for some fun collaboration between them. Beyond the main characters, Donnie has some really compelling dynamics with minor characters such as Sydney, Kirby, Jana, and Usagi. Another thing I really enjoy about 2003 Donnie is how he acts under pressure and all of the things he's gone through. This poor boy has experienced far too much trauma that has gone unaddressed, from Same as It Never Was to him double mutating. But the most telling instance when it comes to who he is as a person is his dedication to retrieving Splinter from cyberspace in Back to the Sewer. Donnie takes the blame entirely and works himself to the bone to get Splinter back, and this internalized guilt and need to be useful is an insecurity I love to see explored with Donatello. On top of all of this, 2003 Don is sassy and witty, just like every good Donatello should be.
Don't do it, guys. I'm not worth it. You know, he's got a point.
In 2nd place, I have Donatello from the 1987 animated series. 1987 Donatello is absolutely adorable. I'm obsessed with his voice and what a sweetheart he is. Similarly to 2003 Donnie, 1987 Donatello is incredibly resourceful, but because of the sillier, more cartoony nature of this show, he's able to make more ridiculous inventions. And somehow these inventions manage to make perfect sense and be entirely realistic for this universe. We also occasionally see some of that insecurity insecurity about him not being useful to the team or being too different from his brothers, contributing to him reading as autistic. But the flip side of that characterization is the pure pride and joy that Donatello radiates when sharing his knowledge and inventions with the world. 1987 Donatello is the cutest of the Donatellos, and it absolutely works in his favor. I love this little guy so much. Finally, in first place is Donatello from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Rise Donnie has such a delightful energy about him. He's sassy and sarcastic while also serving as great autism representation, which is a big reason why I've connected to Donatello so much as a character. In particular, the way he is a very emotional person, but often struggles with handling and expressing that emotion is something that I relate to very heavily. He also has such great bonds with all three of his brothers and April. Each relationship is unique, but very telling of how much he cares about his loved ones. As I mentioned earlier, something I adore to see highlighted for Donatello is his insecurity and need to feel useful and to excel, or he's not of value, and we absolutely see that insecurity addressed and challenged in this show, particularly in the episode Donnie vs. Witchtown. Rise Donnie is so whimsical in a chaotic way and is an absolute delight throughout the series, easily making him my favorite version of Donatello and one of my top 3 turtles in the entire franchise. And Rise Donnie will probably always be my favorite version of Donatello because he is quite literally the reason I got into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the first place. I've told this story a few times, but the reason I started watching TMNT was because I had seen a few clip compilations from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, mostly of Donatello. I immediately fell in love with his character and decided to check out the show, which I also fell in love with because it is such a delight. As I started engaging with Rise fan content more, I started to see a lot of 2012 stuff as well, and so I decided to check out the 2012 show just so I could get more context for a lot of the Rise 2012 crossover fan art that I'd seen. Well, that ended up dragging me down a rabbit hole of deciding to watch every single show and movie and start reading the comics, so here we are now. For this reason, I find it highly unlikely that Rise Donnie will ever be surpassed just because of how much he means to me in the context of the franchise. That said, there are so many incredible Donatellos that I cherish and see myself in. He is a very special character to me. Now that I've finished ranking all of the on-screen Donatellos, it's time to move on to discussing my version of Donatello from my personal iteration of TMNT called TMNT Genesis. When it comes to Genesis Donnie's voice, I picture him as being voiced by Zeno Robinson. I think he's most known as Hunter from the Owl House, or Nino and Max from the most recent seasons of Miraculous. He's also in Date Everything, which I still haven't played, and I'm still avoiding spoilers like the plague, but I've seen that he's on the cast list for that game, so I'm like, I don't know where he is, but he's gonna jump scare me at some point when I finally play it.
Sure, I've never actually spoken to which is my age. Teens are probably into the same things as me, like authority, rules. I trained a lot. I studied a lot. I wasn't really allowed to be around the other scouts. But weekends were nice. Human disguise? Check. According to Cosmic Frontier, this is what the modern human male wears.
But back to Donatello, he's 16 and the oldest of the turtles and was originally intended to be the leader of the group. This is because Splinter, who is a very science-oriented guy, saw himself the most in Donatello because Donnie most quickly picked up the science stuff. And because of this, Splinter decided that Donnie would be the best leader of the group when it came to eventually infiltrating TCRI. But because Donatello did not want this role, he's more of a behind-the-scenes type of guy, he recommended that Leo instead be appointed leader because he recognized those traits within Leo and saw it as an opportunity for his younger sibling to grow in that way. And Splinter ends up agreeing to this and realizes that this was the best decision that could have been made for the leadership. When it comes to Donnie's relationship with Leo, he gives Leo advice a lot of the time because although Don isn't the leader, he's still the oldest and still has that insight. And so when Leo particularly is struggling with connecting with one of their siblings, Don will very often be like, here's what I've noticed from a very observational standpoint because Don is very analytical. And so he approaches things much more analytically, and so it helps Leo kind of have that sort of database of knowledge that Don has collected as the oldest sibling, which is kind of interesting. But these two also very much struggle with their feelings and sort of bottle them up and bottle up their insecurities, and they're like, oh, nobody needs to know about my problems, it's fine. But I think that's something that all 4 of the turtles struggle with, but especially with Don and Leo, and both of them sort of bottle up those emotions and struggle with talking about them. They are also both sci-fi and fantasy nerds. They would absolutely be playing D&D if they had a group to play with because Raph is not into it at all, and Mikey could probably be persuaded, but I imagine that eventually once they make friends with like Casey and April and stuff, they finally have a D&D group they bring together, which is kind of cute. And Leo and Don would be the most into it by far. Hey, editing Tori here. I realized I forgot to talk about Michelangelo in this video while I was editing it, but Mikey's relationship with Donnie is very similar to the way it is in a lot of the other shows. But in TMNT Genesis specifically, Mikey loves to rope Don into pulling pranks on their other siblings, and Don very much acts as that voice of reason, so Mikey doesn't do anything too crazy. But Michelangelo is definitely the most successful in bringing Donatello out of his shell a bit, and will sometimes try to help Don in the lab even though it's not his area of expertise. As the two oldest, they have a special connection of wanting to make sure Leo and Raph are okay, because the two of them are very tense a lot of the time, and so Mikey and Don kind of work together to try to make sure that their relationship is healthy as well. Now, Don's personality towards the start of the story is much more like reserved and gentle and keeping to himself. He doesn't really express his emotions a lot of the time and is very analytical, to the point, get to work. But he does have this anger that he keeps bottled up, and every little thing kind of sets him up and kind of builds up like Mob from Mob Psycho 100 until he eventually reaches like a breaking point in which he has an outburst of anger, and it can be pretty destructive. And this is something he learns to regulate a bit more throughout the story, especially by allowing him to more freely feel his feelings. But these sort of violent and aggressive thoughts and feelings that he has is one of the ways in which he connects to Raph. Because Raph is the youngest, and also because Raph is much more emotion driven and much less analytical, it's a little bit difficult for Don to connect to him. And so having this emotional, violent, aggressive outburst thing that he has, and being able to relate to Raphael on that level, opens the way for him to connect to his youngest sibling a bit more. Something I generally think I want to explore with this version of the Turtles is that they were kind of really close when they were really little, but then sort of drifted apart after a while, and at the start of the main story, they're at this kind of weird, awkward point of being teenagers that like are kind of isolated in their own way, and through, you know, going out and completing their missions, they kind of grow to be close again. And I think that's a really fun little story to tell, and we especially see that in the ways in which Don and Raph are loners. Another way in which Don ends up connecting to Raphael is through Raph's love of animals, and Don realizing he has that love of animals, and so they share that sort of passion, Don from a more scientific standpoint and Raph from a more I like animals standpoint. Speaking of animals, Nezumi is the Hamato family's pet rat. I'll talk about the Nezumi and Splinter backstory in Splinter's video once we get to that, but Nezumi is the rat that led Yoshi to mutate into Splinter, so it's Nezumi's DNA that caused Splinter to become a rat. But they keep Nezumi as their pet rat, and she very often keeps Don company during late nights in the lab when he's working on some project. And so he set up a little like hamster wheel for her to run around in, and they've got a fun little relationship. That's something that I really like about Nezumi as a character concept, is she has a unique little relationship with each of the members of the Hamato family, which I think is a lot of fun. When it comes to the actual like origins, I will talk about the Turtles' origin in Splinter's video, but Don is the first one to learn about their mutation, and that Yoshi used to work for TCRI, and then him leaving is what eventually caused their mutation, and he learns about the mission to take down TCRI because, hey, there are a bunch of aliens trying to terraform the Earth, and this kind of sparks him to really be like, okay, I gotta work constantly, I gotta be helpful to the family, I need to make sure we're able to stop this. And this is what starts Don down the path of being a shut-in and not really engaging with his family as much for a while. And that's something that ties into his character arc of learning to welcome more people into his life, because he is an introvert, but he needs that family connection, and then eventually friends and partners and whatever else his heart desires. When he does meet April, he does have a bit of a crush on her and ends up telling her about his feelings, and April's like, hey, that's really cool. I'm a lesbian though. And he's immediately kind of embarrassed, and this is kind of like a moment for him of realization that, hey, because April probably kind of laughs in that moment, like, that's really cute, but I'm not interested. And I think that's kind of an opening of Don's eyes to kind of see, like, he's allowed to express his feelings a bit more. Like, April's very emotional and, like, blunt reaction kind of leads him to be like, oh, hey, I can be a bit more open about how I feel about things. I don't need to be so deadpan, and, you know, I don't have to feel like I need to mask all emotions. I'm allowed to express them however I want, even if it's taken as a bit weird or a bit off compared to how other people express their emotions. But anyway, after that whole thing, they become very close best friends. Don no longer has feelings for her. He gets over her pretty quickly, largely because of Casey, which we'll get to. But they are best friends, and they're like siblings. April likes to tease him about the crush thing, because they're like, yeah, I don't know why I ever felt like that, because you are a sister to me. And they especially actually wingman pretty well for each other. They love to, like, kind of poke fun at each other for their crushes, but also try to help them out and give them advice on how to get with each other's respective partners, which is really cute. And then once meeting Casey, Don is initially really freaking annoyed by them because Casey is very extra and Don finds them to be kind of insufferable at first. His feelings change for them when he kind of starts connecting and realizing that Casey has a very similar feeling to him, where Casey is the oldest sibling and has a younger sister named Marie and needs to take care of her because of issues with his parents. And Don sees this, and although Don is very much a shut-in and kind of has isolated himself from his family, he still very much cares about them and is worried about them. And those are the few moments in which he sort of leaves his shut-in status, would be because there's something very specific that his family needed. And so when he sees that Casey has this relationship with their younger sister, he's like, oh, maybe Casey isn't an annoying piece of shit all the time, and kind of starts developing feelings for them, and they eventually get together. I haven't really planned how that ends up coming to fruition, but that is something that ends up happening because, hey, I'm a Donatello girly and I think it's super cute. Casey also has their own issues with sort of regulating their emotions, and so the two of them kind of work together to understand each other's feelings and in turn understand their own feelings, and it's really cute and wholesome and a moment of growth for both of them. And as far as Don's main character arc and character growth goes, is him learning to be in touch with his emotions more, because a lot of the time he's just shut them off and been like, I'm not allowed to feel anything, I need to just lock in and stop this threat, and shutting him off and just being a workaholic in that way. And so he learns that he can feel his emotions however they come to him, even if it's not socially acceptable or whatever, however he expresses his emotions, because he's very insecure in that way. And he learns to feel his feelings and uses him feeling his feelings to more creatively connect with his science and his knowledge and the stuff that he does as part of the Hamato family. And it just makes him better and more in tune with his things and makes him happier, and it's just a good little arc for him. And that's basically all of my thoughts for Genesis Donatello right now. I do think at some point I want him to double mutate, like in 2003. I think that'd be fun. Give the boy some trauma, you know, as you do. But that does it for this ranking. Let me know your thoughts on the different Donatellos and which Donatello is your personal favorite. I will eventually be putting up a poll on my channel that will ask you to vote for which character I should rank next, so make sure to subscribe so you will see that poll when it comes out. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like if you did. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.